Okay, well, let's make a start. Well, as I say, welcome everyone to Spacestore's next panel webinar, following the theme on the series of the post-COVID workplace. We've got a great panel here today, which we'll introduce shortly. But today, within that theme of the post-COVID workplace, we want to explore people and culture and how we protect them as we look forward to how the office and the workspace is going to look as we come out of this situation that we're in. I'd like to introduce us now. So I'm Russell Kingston with Spacestor, and I'm the Managing Director for the US part of our business. And I'm moderating today with my colleague, Alex Harvey. Over to you, Alex.
Yeah, hello all and welcome. Thanks, Russell. So my name's Alex Harvey, VP of Sales with Spacestor, and the perspective and insight that I've come from is from working with many of our corporate clients on a global basis, I guess, largely focused on Europe and the North American territories, where we've been working with them to develop workplace solutions for their own workplaces and needs. And we're very interested in continuing to listen to our clients, listen to the views and opinions and ideas there are in the marketplace around what does the post-COVID workplace look like. So that's the background that I've coming from, Russell. Thanks.
Thank you, Alex. And Lindsay, over to you.
Hi everybody. I'm Lindsey Wilson, president of the architecture and design firm Corgan. I'm also the interior sector practice leader and have spent my career, helping companies transform their workplaces to reflect their culture. So in this situation we're in now, I'm really passionate about how we keep that connection to people and culture as we figure out the future of the workplace.
Thanks, Lindsay. That's excellent. And Rachel.
Hi everyone, I'm Rachel Edwards. I'm a strategist in the Workplace Futures team at Lendlease. For those of you who don't know us, we're a global integrated property company headquartered in Australia, where I spent a good part of my life growing up. And we have a real sweet spot in large-scale urban regeneration projects, so creating communities for people to live, work and play. In London, you might know some of them, IQL in Stratford and Elephant Park and Elephant and Castle. For me, from a workplace perspective, this is about really understanding how people will be working in the future and what the future of talent want as we come back to work. So that's what's playing big on my mind, and I think we're in a really interesting situation just now that can help to drive us there.
Thank you, Rachel. And Teresa.
Good morning, at least from the New York City. My name is Teresa Festus, and I have 20 years of experience in people development within various types of organizations, from global media companies to where I am now with a boutique real estate firm based in New York City. And as prior to this current circumstance with COVID, there's been so much focus and shift towards considering how culture and the experience that people are having in their everyday lives at work have an impact on organizations. And so I'm committed to sort of understanding for myself and for our companies, as well as our tenants, how to create those better experiences, and just want to celebrate all of the people that are in my industry of people and culture and human resources for their just jumping in over the past several months to become real diversified experts in a lot of things that wouldn't typically fall under our purview. So I'm excited to have part of this conversation and to not only learn, but to share. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Teresa. And we're very enthused to have you all on board today. So as we dive into this subject of protecting people and culture, it's been really interesting to see the speed at which this whole subject has developed and morphed and changed over the past few weeks. How our thinking around it has changed, just from where it was perhaps in mid-March when the lockdown first was upon us to where it is right now. So I think a lot of people in the conversations that we're having are seeing this context of fear versus risk as they try and bring people back into the workplace. We've got the short-term challenges of how we bring people back in safely, how we make people feel safe. A lot of it is about how people feel as well as the actual protections that we need. But then how do we think for the long term? How do we not lose some of those great strides forward that we've had in workplace design, and how we bring the brand and the experiential workplace in, how we actually make huge steps forward in sustainability, how we're giving people choice. And I think as we spoke yesterday, Rachel, you mentioned about how we've been given something that can't be taken back again. There's a huge barrier being broken down, and we're in a new area, and it's opening up some really interesting challenges, but some really exciting opportunities. And I think the other thing that is very apparent to us is that how we are now, as we've been in lockdown, that's not what working from home might look like in the future. And that's not what a hybrid situation might look like either. So if I hand over to you now, Lindsay, to give us a bit of an overview of how you're seeing things in your recent conversations and insights.
Sure, absolutely. So over the past, 9 weeks, we've had a lot of conversations with our clients, and just the evolution of those conversations over the past 9 weeks has been really interesting. At the beginning, it was kind of, how do we communicate with our employees now that everyone's working from home? How do we stay connected? Then it shifted to, what should we be reading? What should we be understanding? Where do we go from here? And, oh my gosh. And then it shifted to, how do we make a plan to re-enter our offices, and what does that mean for the future? And I think we've talked a lot about how this experiment we were all forced into happened literally overnight, and it's hard to wrap your mind around the fact that the next steps, the future implication on the future of work, is not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a much slower progress to figuring out what is the right solution for each organization. And something that I've said for my entire career is that one size does not fit all. That has meant a lot of things when we talk about the workplace over the past 20 years, but now it also applies to one size is not going to fit all when it comes to remote work, hybrid work, and reopening your workplaces.
That's great. And I think you mentioned yourself in one of your articles that how when we're all remote like this, we've come out remote, but we actually have personal connections that we had prior to lockdown. And the longer that this situation goes on, that actually gets harder. And if we're bringing new people into the organisation, there's a whole piece there about maintaining and building that culture, which is going to be really challenging.
Yes, I have an opinion that we may have been lulled into feeling like, oh my gosh, this was so successful. Everyone did so well. And in a lot of cases, that is really true, but you have to break down, everyone was in, for the most part, the vast majority of people were in the same situation. They were all remote. They were all the same size little square on a screen for the past 3 months. And they were working with people they already had established relationships with, most frequently working on projects that were already underway or initiatives that were underway. So there's another wave of really analyzing remote work and hybrid work when we onboard new employees, when we start new projects, when we undertake new innovation, that we need to mine a lot more data around that and figure out what works and what doesn't. And I'm the most excited in hopes that we can continue this conversation, that no one's saying, okay, let's just put it back exactly like it was before. Instead, let's keep learning and let's really find the future of work for each organization, and the future of the workplace's role in the whole thing.
That's great.
Thank you. I have a note, if you don't mind.
Go for it, Teresa.
Yeah, I think to connect with what Lindsay was saying, I think one thing that has come really to the surface over the past 3 months is not only individual but organizational agility and the ability to pivot very quickly as we had to. There wasn't a choice. And I think it's enhanced the creativity, as Lindsay was saying. We're hoping that we don't go back to this kind of perhaps more less flexible structure where it's always 100% in the office or it's always not. Like that there is a gray area in the middle that everybody and different organizations will find their own space what works for them based on their business, their industry, the way they interact with customers, the way they interact with one another. But I also think that it is going to create an open space for creativity in how we actually do things like onboarding, creating relationships with people that aren't in the same room with one another. And I know that there are a lot of companies out there that already have great expertise in that. It's how they work through their own distributed workforces. And so I think it's about kind of what's become a much more interactive intersection and communication across businesses and industries to learn some of those techniques and enhance and create new ones.
It's great, thank you, Teresa. And for those of you that have just joined us, we're exploring further on our subjects of the post-COVID workplace and focusing today particularly on protecting people and culture. And we'd like to encourage you to drop your questions into the Q&A box. We want plenty of interaction. This is not a scripted webinar panel today. We're free flying and we'd love your questions, so please get them coming in as we're talking. And over to you, Rachel, give us your insights and view of things from what you're hearing and seeing out there.
I mean, as I said, I'm really interested in how we'll be working in the future and what the future talent or what future workers will want to come to. And we have been pushed into this really interesting place just now where we're all experiencing the same thing in principle, but actually we're all having very different experiences underneath it. My experience from working from home is definitely different to all of yours. And I think going further than what you, Lindsey and Teresa, both said is that it's not cookie cutter at all. And it's not cookie cutter for a single organization. Every individual will have very different needs. And we're starting to really realize what those needs are individually and what we as individuals want to go back to in the future. Before all of this, I mean, we were already seeing a big shift in what people wanted from a workplace. So choice being super important, as you mentioned, well-being, life balance, people wanting to work for organizations that they could really connect with and that align with their purpose and values. And also just, we were seeing a big shift in sort of younger generations wanting to work in places that added value to their lifestyle. So more than just the spaces that their organizations rent, but the location of those and the other amenities around that help to support them. So I think what this is doing is just really accelerating all of those trends. They're not new, but they're going to come a lot faster. Number 4.
That's very, you know, the big disruption accelerate and new trends and perhaps kill off some old ones.
Yeah, hopefully.
It's a huge opportunity, this, isn't it? And whilst there's challenges and there's difficulties, it's also a great springboard to drive some positive change. So we're seeing a lot of people having to react very quickly to how they might get their workforce able to safely work. But then how does that play out as we go forward? And Teresa.
Yeah, sorry. I know I was going to say that, and also mentioned before, the kind of choice and I think resilience, and is something that organizations will be wanting to build into their workplace, so it has that flexibility to be resilient to future situations like this. Yeah,
that's a very good point.
One of the other things we've seen around choice, Rachel, I really love your point, and I think that's 100% the way we see many of our clients going, is it doesn't just even come down to an individual, it comes down to that individual's day to day. So the type of task they might be doing, maybe their personality style, maybe the mood you're in, and actually that in itself will dictate the type of environment you want to position yourself in. One of those choices, I think, is now being completely validated that actually one of those is your desk at home. But there are many other choices that we have, whether it's some kind of flexible working space, whether it's in the traditional office.
Or is it in my home today and in a cafe tomorrow and in the office on Wednesday?
Absolutely.
I mean, we have experienced a rise in collaborative work and team-based work. I don't think anybody debates that over the past 10 years. And some of that work was already distributed with global teams working together. I think there's a really interesting topic of kind of task interdependence, and is your role suited for ultimate flexibility, or are there some guardrails depending on the type of team you're on or project you're on? And this could change over the course of a year or over the course of your career. But we are hearing and seeing in some of these surveys, just individuals are asked if they are productive. But then when the leader of the team is asked if the team is productive, those two things aren't always matching up right now. And again, unique situation, experiment. But I think conversations around where and how you work and how your choice ties in with the rest of your team and the interdependence of teammates on each other is going to be an interesting deep dive that wasn't always part of our in-depth programming when we started to work on projects. We certainly asked about different departments, asked who works together, what are the regular hours, when do you meet, but we've already been shifting our programming discussions to ask more questions about interdependence, face-to-face, collaborative innovation, and how does that work together to set variety and choice guardrails.
Yeah, that's great. And we're getting some really interesting questions coming in. And one of the first ones here is around the whole topic of social distancing and how we approach that, and whether is that going to be something that's going to stay? Is it going to change when we get a vaccine? Is it going to change the way we interact and work in the workspace going forward? What do you think to that, Lindsey?
So our recommendation to our clients, some of them who are very large and have millions of square feet, has been not to rush to an immediate replanning of the workplace. That in all cases across the world, we're ramping occupancy back up. There's limits in many places anyway. And so using technology to run clash detection on where people can sit and maintain social distancing to help organizations figure out, how many people could you have in your various workplaces without doing major reconfigurations. At the same time, trying to figure out what are the best practices going to be for the future. We believe wider aisles are absolutely going to become best practice. And I think the design community would welcome that. We were all kind of pushing against these really dense open office plans anyway. So if we can say there's some best practices around aisle widths to let people pass each other, around pre-function and post-function spaces where larger spaces exit and mix, and that we will not see the standard workstation get smaller than that 6-foot dimension, as that's kind of become the hallmark.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting, and the whole subject around working from home is a really interesting one. How attitudes are going to change to that. One of the questions that's just come in now is how do we think that employers' attitudes towards working from home are going to be more relaxed, and as a result of this, are people going to want to work from home more going forward? Do you have a view on that, Teresa?
Absolutely. I think that it's going to be incredibly dependent on the type of business you operate in. I think right now we're in a very specific point in time with what's happening from a health and safety standpoint. And it really does go back to that question of risk, and connectivity that we're trying to create. So I think that companies right now that are able to are definitely going through that rethinking process. And from what I've seen and through my network, we're kind of in a very slow decision-making period. And I myself hesitant to, put a stake in the sand for what it's going to look like 3 months from now, 6 months from now, and forward, because I think so much of that is interdependent on what is happening with the health and safety of our employee populations. And so, if this were a unique scenario where that sort of umbrella concern of health and safety risk wasn't there, the decision might be different. The action might be different if it were some other sort of global event taking place. But with it being so directly tied to that, I think people are, companies that are being more open to the concept. I think employees are also getting a taste of what flexibility feels like, particularly for those companies where flexibility wasn't really on the table before. So, you know, I think it's about communication and having open dialogues, and whether it's people in culture, managers directly driving some of those conversations to really understand in the short term, what is the need to actually be in the office, and recognizing that for some people, that need is about getting back to that feeling we had of, you know, connecting with our coworkers that we have these great relationships with, and the type of casual conversations that happen, and reconciling that with the reality of what it's going to be when you're actually in the office with PPE on, and how much more difficult that is interpersonally, until we can get to a place where there is a better understanding of health and safety. So I think we're going to all have to be open to the conversation of what does flexibility look like? What does a work from home strategy look like for our employees based on industry, based on business requirements?
Yeah, and I think that key word, flexibility, we can't, as you say, put that stake in the ground and say this is it for the next 18 months, because I think we've been taught that we've got to be very flexible. It's interesting as well, some of the questions coming in, one of them here around culture, and I don't know if you'd have a view on this, Rachel, as to the question being that to what extent can people work away from the office and still feel part of and contribute to the culture? And is there going to be a need to get people to come back in to kind of reload with the organisation's culture? What's your view on that one?
Look, I think what this has shown is that the workplace does have a really important role in building belonging and culture and brand for an organization. I've been reading a few different wide scale surveys. So a recent one from Gensler said that 75% of people miss other people most from the office. Leesman have also been doing research around how people are getting on in terms of their sentiment from working from home. I think they've got about 40,000 responses now, but they released the first 10,000, which is really interesting because it started to unpack what activities are best done at home and what are best done in the office. And the home activities are all very much focused around deep thinking work, privacy, and the workplace is focused around, as you said, culture, connecting with people, connecting with clients, showcasing your organization. Learning will be a really important part of the future workplace. But I definitely think it has a role. And back to the question before about returning to the office, if we're returning to something that doesn't reflect all of those things, then I think it's important to think about what that looks like.
Yeah.
There's also
So go ahead,
Alex. There's also the element of, depending on the business of the organization's customers. So in a lot of our headquarters projects over the past few years, there's been a big focus on what's the experience of a potential customer or large-scale business partnership for big brands, exploring things like that. And the workplace was able to showcase their values, their culture, how they worked, especially if they were trying to align with another organization. And those are things that a lot of these workplaces were built to do. So it was less about the day-to-day activity of a single employee of that organization, but rather about big partnerships or big sales opportunities to connect two companies together. And so that's a second element of what the workplace does. It's not just for the employees of that organization. It has a bigger web of things that it was designed to accomplish in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I'll add to what I said before as well with a bit of a naughty plug, but for the past sort of 18 months, I've been working with the Loneliness Lab, who were co-founded by Lend-Lease, with the purpose of reducing loneliness in our communities and in our cities through the way that we design place and space. So it very much works in line with behaviors and policies, but focused on the way that we design spaces that help people connect meaningfully. And it's across all of our life streams. So from homes to public realm, retail, but I was very much focused on the workplace side. And two of the points I think are super important. One of them is the connection to the organization or your kind of wider team is just as important as individual connections. And we ran a survey to understand where people feel connected and where they don't. And remote workers came up as feeling some of the loneliest, and mobile workers felt the least lonely. And without having more insight to why that is, a lot of the discussions that we've been having were around, well, could it have been the expectation of, or if you're able to move around, then you're at home when you want to be at home by yourself, and you can be out with the rest of your organization when you want to be as well. So it comes back to that sort of freedom of choice that keeps coming up in conversation. But yeah, some really interesting insights, and this has only exacerbated loneliness, which was already 9 million people across the UK before lockdown. So I think we'll see very different ways of trying to connect in the coming years.
I'm just interested in what both yourself, Rachel, and Lindsey were saying earlier as to the workplace, and I think you're 100% right that the workplace is part of that culture building that has to happen. It's not the only part, but it's a really important and vital piece of that jigsaw. I think we've still seen, within our own organisation and with other organisations, the culture hasn't fallen to pieces in the last 3 months, but to kind of continue to keep that culture live and growing, and as we've already said, bringing new people into the organisation and getting them embedded and imbued into that culture, the workplace is a really important piece of that. It's like a foundation to that culture. So, there are digital ways of team building. There are digital ways of sharing culture and, participating in culture building exercises. But I think without the physical element, some of those other things don't have as much impact as they might do when you've got that kind of interconnected physical and digital. That's certainly what we've felt in our organisation. And I'm kind of hearing a few things like that being talked about as well with clients.
Well, it has nothing to do. Oh, go ahead, Teresa.
I was just going to say, I think it's also perhaps us looking at the definition and the concept of what culture is within an organization. Most certainly there is a huge element for those people that seek more interpersonal connection, the sense of being together, the sense of community that they seek is contributing to, I'm sure, a lot of those people feeling more lonely right now. It's totally natural. You're not exposed to as many people as you would have been. I think there's obviously a very significant sector of people who don't seek that interpersonal connection. It's about individual approach and individual behavioral interests or just styles. The other piece of that is, I think, exploring what else comes in to create a culture. We spend a lot of time talking about the piece of interactivity, which is super critical, but in what other ways are employers serving their own employees to build culture outside of just the sole interaction? The reality is that this may become a much longer term challenge to deal with than what we're anticipating today. So in preparation for, designing with foresight, if you will, figuring out how do we create and build the sense of connectivity, the sense of loyalty, the sense of connection in a virtual environment. And so I think it's looking at all the facets of what makes a culture within an organization and sort of expanding the definition, if you will.
Yeah, I think this plays into a topic that's a bit of a hot button for me, and that is this notion that's out there in some of the media that having reduced footprint or having less real estate because you have more remote workers is going to make this whole proposition less expensive for a company, which I don't buy at all. I mean, if you think about it, if you have everybody together in one place, creating culture and sending the same messages is not that hard. And you can do it with less people. So you've got everybody together. You can have a town hall. You can have, you know, the same celebrations week in or month in and month out. If you're essentially what Teresa was talking about, you absolutely can create culture and connect people virtually, but you're going to need a bigger, a more robust people department to deal with the physical culture and what's happening in the brick and mortar place, and what's the digital experience, what's the virtual onboarding, what's the in-person onboarding. It's essentially two different components that will require more people. We also believe IT departments have to be bigger and more robust when you're talking about this level of mobile and flexible work. There is a ton of information out there about the increased amount of cyber attacks that have gone on, and we've seen it in our organization and we've seen it in our clients' organizations. People are a lot more susceptible when they're at home. For some reason, they will click on that stupid phishing email a lot more often than they are when they're sitting in the workplace environment, and it's a comfort thing. So the balance of perhaps your real estate might reduce, but I think you're going to see an increased amount of workforce in IT and HR to maintain your culture in that level. But it's absolutely possible.
That's very interesting. Just slightly digressing off that point as well, there's been a few questions I'm just going to pull together here where people asking about the aesthetics of the office place, the office workplace. You know, will we be going into perhaps back in time to more cellular situations, and will there be a change in the materials that we use in the workplace? There's been lots of talk about different materials and antimicrobial properties and things like that. How do you think, Lindsey, that the aesthetics of the office might change because of this?
Our designers are really excited to see what kind of innovations come out of this. We're absolutely going to see new products. We're going to see more touchless and reduced touch types of fixtures and equipment. So as usual, when we face a challenge, we see a whole round of innovative new products and materials come out of it. So we absolutely expect that in the coming year. In addition to workplace design at Corgan, we also have healthcare design professionals in that vertical market. And we've had a great time collaborating with those designers and architects to talk about those best practices. And there's one that came to the surface quickly that seems so obvious. Every hospital has clean and dirty janitorial closets. No office buildings have that. Why is that? And it's been a challenge when you talk about some of the cleaning and disinfection to react to the COVID-19 pandemic. It would be a heck of a lot easier if there was a clean janitorial and a dirty janitorial, just like there is in every hospital. So I think there will be learnings between healthcare and workplace and hospitality and workplace that can just make things easier to keep people safe and confident.
Yeah, one of the subjects that we've come across is that perhaps some of the things that have been happening a bit more out of sight or will need to be made more visible to make people be comfortable. So the cleaning may have been done out of the working day, but now it'll be brought into working hours so people can see the standards and the level of cleanliness that's being kept up.
You know, Disney has always been used as a hallmark for on-stage, off-stage, and many corporate clients will use them as an example of, you know, how do we keep all the cleaning and shipping and receiving kind of off stage, and now everybody wants to see it. And it's definitely a shift. So a lot of it is a shift in communication and perception, things we've never communicated in our workplaces. We just need to communicate them more now. How frequent is the cleaning? Employees want to know, in some organizations, even the types of products that are used. And so there's a million things you could talk about around communication. Alex, I think you had said in most cases people felt their cultures really continued to thrive during the shelter in place. I would tell you that's absolutely dependent on how well they were communicated with. Cultures that flourished had a high level of transparency and a lot of communication, and cultures that perhaps diminished in effectiveness over this time were absolutely due to less communication, less transparency, less kind of repeating of that communication to meet people where they were during this time.
I think that goes to the idea of sort of, unfortunately, as companies all fought to find answers, research, become experts in things that we haven't been experts in before, kind of an out of sight, out of mind, where I think some people have that concern either from a management perspective and not having that kind of visual oversight, versus just sort of not having it, not walking out of your space or through an office environment and seeing people and saying hi and having that visual connectivity. And so I know quite a few people that have had a bit of a struggle within their organizations where there just hasn't been a lot of outreach. But I also think that what's going to be incredibly important, you mentioned, the antimicrobial surface coverings and cleaning and those things that as a commercial real estate owner and operator, it is, we've been working for weeks, as many of them have, weeks and months to come up with what is the best approach for our common spaces, for those amenity spaces that we've been planning to build and are in progress and construction, and how do we pivot on those things, and in concert with that, provide opportunities and services to our tenants who are asking those same questions, not about the building necessarily, but about their own internal space. So I think it is in a lot of ways incumbent on building owner operators to be considering what those needs of their tenancy is and to work to provide services so they have the answers that they need. I was on a conversation yesterday and there were quite a few people in culture, HR ops individuals that were sort of looking for companies that provide these back to work services, whether it's putting up signage or office redesign and realignment. And I think in some cases, providing great resources or touch points to help support those questions is going to be really mission critical for landlords, business owners, building operators.
That's great. Thanks, Teresa. And it's one of the interesting questions that's just come out from the audience. Just going to put your way, Rachel. And I think it's a very interesting topic overall. And I don't know if we have all the answers, but I'd be very interested in your viewpoint as to whether we're going to see a reduction in the footprint of offices to perhaps smaller, more central collaborative centres rather than the bigger offices we've had. Or do you think we're just going to have bigger workspaces just to allow everyone to spread out more? Which way do you think it's going to go? Have you got a view on that?
Look, I don't know the answer, and I'm not sure anyone really knows the answer to that one. But I think where we may see a reduction in the typical desk-based work, we'll likely see an increase in other types of spaces, and that is those collaborative type spaces to allow people to come together. I think a really important part of that, though, and it does link into that question, but it's just for future resilience, is to build in the flexibility and to think about the flexibility to be able to ramp up and down and to change in real time as to what those needs are. And that's within your own workspace, but also, as Teresa mentioned before, the other amenities around you, how can you leverage them, from other spaces in your building to local cafes to parks right next to you to take walking meetings to support your overall workplace operation. Because I think the way we'll be working in the future will be different and a lot more flexible.
Yeah, so thinking will go a lot broader than perhaps it has been.
Yeah, definitely.
That's good.
Changing direction slightly, Russell, I noticed a few questions coming in around, particularly thinking of the people side of our conversation, the impact on work-life balance that I guess both the short-term situation we're in now, and then maybe the longer-term impact of that may have, which is, I'm just thinking from my own personal point of view, actually, I find that working from home is less easy to kind of switch off and walk away. And you don't have that kind of commute time to unwind and de-stress and kind of just sweat out all the day's stuff that's been going on. You're kind of back into the family immediately. But what are you seeing with your clients, Rachel, so Lindsey and Rachel, in terms of the impact on work-life balance of the whole work from home?
I think it goes along with a few of the other things. It's not one size fits all. I'm like you, Alex. I had the same situation. I actually like the separation mentally, and we have heard conversations about where there were good boundaries in teams before, where teams had kind of evolved to, not emailing on the weekend, and had established some real technology boundaries over the past couple of years. In a lot of cases, those evaporated, especially if the leader evaporated them. And let that work and home really kind of bleed together. So I do think that's a concern. And I think we'll see a whole kind of wave of communication about, okay, when you're working from home and everything is more blurred, how do we establish those boundaries that let people have a work-life balance? I mean, it's the technology. It doesn't matter where you work. I mean, this thing is going everywhere with you anyway. And so I actually think it's still two different conversations, just like it was before. When are you working and when are you not working, irregardless of the place? And how does that tie back to the culture of your organization?
And it's certainly going to have a big impact on the whole concept, or the whole conversation, I should say, around mental health as well. I think if that continues, or as that continues, that's a very wide-ranging impact on the people side.
It is, and I think as we get into kind of the holiday season, I mean, we already made the announcement here, that there wouldn't be any of our traditional big celebrations that we have in all of our offices. And I think we're going to see some people missing, there's key cultural touch points in different organizations, whether it's holidays or retirement celebrations or honoring promotions, however people celebrate. Those are going to be interesting. How can you adapt that? And do you start to see some little cracks in the culture when you miss some touchstones? And what can you do to make up for those as time moves forward? I do think we will see it may take 18 months, but attrition of some of the best and brightest. I mean, it's a lot easier to get someone to change organizations when they're not connected. So really got to keep an eye on that.
If I can add, I think that one of the things that I've observed within my Sage, our own organization, is, through the use of technologies we weren't using before, so greater collaboration tools, not having that personal touch point, I would actually say that there's been a greater connection on things that people are interested in, kind of information that might not have come to the surface more broadly across the organization because of proximity or geography where people are located. And so, I know one of the questions somebody asked, is the panel excited about kind of some of the changes in the workforce? I think that there are going to be there's a real space to talk about what have been the positives to come from this kind of lemonade out of lemon situation. And I think for some companies and those that are taking the time and effort to be creative with their collaboration, whether it's finding out from your individual employees, what are they into right now? When you do have time and you are not thinking about COVID or something else happening, what are you watching? What are you talking about? What books are you reading? What are you into? Are you cooking? And coming up with ways to create moments of connection using tools like on Slack channels, Donut, or other recognition tools to try to create some of that energy in a time when we can't have it in person. And some people are going to be attracted to it and some people aren't, but at least it creates some momentum for those that are kind of seeking that connectivity. And one other thing I would say is, I think if you've got some of the folks writing in questions or wondering, I don't know what my company is doing, I haven't heard from my company, I'd really urge you to do some outreach and to ask the question, of your company, to seek those answers. And if they're not providing it, to try to understand why, or, I don't really have a or to that answer, but I think you should be reaching out to your organizations and ask the question and feel comfortable doing so, particularly in a time like now.
I would agree, Teresa, and I think it's really interesting that we're no longer behaving in a way that's can I or can't I do that? We're seeing a lot more people actually just reaching out and doing it and thinking, how do I do it? So we will see innovations in that sense, but it's also bringing people to the forefront that may have been a bit hidden before. We're also, well, for me personally, I've really missed the networking, just in general, and a by chance meeting of people. So things like this, where I've now met both of you, is really wonderful. And it's been a topic of conversation in the Loneliness Lab. They've been holding every couple of weeks. We have a Thursday afternoon tea where anyone can join and just meet new people and talk about things. And it's a new way of sort of networking and having chance interactions with people. But I think that's one of the things that will pull us back out to wanting to be amongst other people.
Yeah, that's it's a very tough balance, isn't it? Because these amenity areas and like the water cooler moments and those chance collaborations are some of the things which are going to be really tough to get back into, whilst trying to balance the whole social distancing piece. So yeah, I think that's a very ongoing conversation that's going to develop.
There was a great Forbes article a couple of weeks ago where the writer said, you know, it's like the difference between looking for a book on Amazon where you know exactly what book you're after or author or subject matter versus going to an actual bookstore and just walking around. That's kind of the difference between working at home and just being in a workplace or at a networking event where you don't know who you're looking for until you run into them. So there's certainly elements that aren't exactly translatable into the virtual world, at least not yet. I mean,
no,
we love all the AI stuff, and our research lab here, Hugo and Media Lab, are really looking at AI and virtual reality and how do we put people in their offices that aren't really their offices. So that's the next frontier.
I'm sure we'll see a Zoom capability soon where you can just meet people in the audience and have side conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can have a meeting inside of our models for buildings or spaces that your view is you're in the model and so are other people in the model during the meeting. It's different, but it's also different than just the kind of video to video experience.
Very exciting. Just thinking of our times, we've got about 11 or 12 minutes left. There's a few questions which have popped in, which I'd like to just touch on. Particularly interested in the impact of materials and the types of materials that we're using, and then other physical elements of the workplace. So we've got a question around infrared cameras. Are they a possibility built into the workplace? We've got a question around wayfinding and using different concepts around kind of carpet marking and that kind of thing. What have you seen, I suppose, Lindsey, of interest in your views from the design side? What have you seen that's kind of really innovative, but also that fits, that doesn't just kind of glare out as just not being in place in a workplace?
Yeah, so we're actually engaged with a flooring manufacturer exploring, can we use flooring materials to help with social distancing with, to your point, not making it like the yellow caution tape that just sends the fear message instead of the confidence message. So I do think we will see products being used, so it's not so much signage. I was talking with a head of real estate for a large organization who said, I don't want to spend a whole lot of money on temporary signage because in 2 weeks it's wallpaper. And that has stuck with me for weeks now because she was 100% right. That stuff fades into the background so quickly. So I do think there's an opportunity to use materials and materiality and wayfinding other than just traditional signage to give those cues. And as we become more accustomed to them, we will know what they mean. Our airport designers are obviously really focused on that right now because that's an area where as people need to gain more confidence to start traveling again, how can we do that in our airport terminals?
Very interesting. What are you seeing in your buildings, Teresa? So you've probably got a slightly different viewpoint.
I was going to say I do. I think that, and again, I think it's all about the evolution of what's going to happen over as time continues. I think making major capital investment in something that where we're in a bit of more of a kind of, let's see how this is going to evolve and what the needs are going to be and what the technology solutions are going to be. For us, I think our primary focus is making sure that people know where to go and that we are at the forefront of considering our tenancy, and anybody who's in any of our 3 million square feet of commercial property, that they understand that we are taking every measure possible to ensure their health and safety. So in a lot of ways, that does mean the yellow sign on the wall saying, please social distance, please, here are the keys to washing your hands effectively, or please, stand behind the line before you come up to the front desk. And I think for us, it is really about the immediacy of the messaging. And for us, we recognize that we could be spending money on signage that 3 months, 9 months, 12 months from now we're not using. It's a worthy investment for us right now as we really look to not making having an immediate response and reaction, but really doing the time-honored research over the next few months and 6 months and year to what are the technologies and what are the ways that we can utilize the actual fixtures, design of our spaces to help promote some of the things that we will be doing more in your face, if you will, over the next few weeks.
How about for yourself, Rachel? What have you seen in terms of the physical element? I'm interested in the opportunities for technology here. I was looking at an interesting solution where the concept of light, kind of beams of light, rather than, as Lindsey said, the kind of black yellow tape strips everywhere, can be used to create either the zones or the walkways, but then the opportunity for technology to maybe adjust the size of those and the shape of those as either the workplace evolves or as somebody is walking along the path. Have you seen anything on the tech side?
I mean, firstly, I'm with Teresa. I think health and safety comes first in this immediate response. There's definitely ways that you can do it to look beautiful and connect in with your brand, maybe cost a little bit more money. I was actually part of, it's interesting you asked that question because it's part of the Cornet hackathon recently with Nick Baxter and your team, and we had some really interesting discussions which were quite forward looking, but hopefully through this will be achieved faster than we thought. But the parts I was really interested in were around the nudging human behavior. So rather than having signage, things like your screen noticing that you have been sitting down for too long and telling you to go for a walk, or your phone. I mean, some of these things we do have, such as like phone prompts to say that you would be getting too close to someone in this initial situation. But I think that some very interesting well-being focused technologies could emerge from this that will actually be really beneficial in the future. So rather than just say strip lighting for the immediate situation, we should look maybe longer term at what other beneficial things could come out of this.
And that kind of brings us back to almost where we started from, that there will be some huge advances and benefits and improvements that come out of this whole situation. Sorry, Lindsey, I interrupted you.
No, I'm good.
Right, and Amanda, you're just going to show us, we're just running towards the end now, but before we wrap up, just want to show everyone that we've got another panel webinar on the 25th, so it'd be great to have you sign up and see you again. So you'll see a link to that will come round after this, and also a quick poll will come out, which we'll be glad for your responses on. So we've got a few minutes left now. It would be great if we could just have a closing wrap up from each of you, following our discussions and the thought that we've developed today. Lindsey, you want to kick off for us?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I think encouraging organizations to look for their unique solutions to the future of work is probably what our firm is most excited about, away from that there's any single solution, and then encouraging our clients to pilot programs, to do experimentation, to gather data, and let's not all rush to deciding that the future of work is yet another binary issue, that it's either you have an office or you work at home, but instead there's a palette of places, a variety of technology solutions, and have our cultures support all of that.
That's great. Thanks, Lindsey. Your insights have been very interesting. Rachel.
Thanks. I mean, I definitely agree with Lindsey. I think that this has given us an opportunity to really think about what we want as individuals going back to work, and as we design that, to think about more than just first of all, think about the importance of what a workspace brings to an organization, but that it is more than just that space. It's the community it's in and the other amenities around it that help build the culture around that space, such as your cafes and restaurants, your parks, and all those spaces that allow people to keep living this newfound lifestyle that they've been experiencing working from home.
Thanks, Rachel. That's great. And Teresa.
I would just say that for me, the breadth and depth of community and knowledge sharing that's been going on is changing us all in the way that we are as professionals and in the industries that we're in, and to continue that sharing and that learning, and recognize that to Lindsey's point, these decisions aren't binary. We're going to have to learn and work through the uncomfortable shift of, change resistance to figure out new ways as we evolve and as we navigate the next period of time until, and potentially after, there's a better medical solution for the response to COVID-19. And so I thank everybody. I've learned some really interesting thought ideas today, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
And we're all learning together.
100%. Yeah, it's you mentioned before, Lindsey, that it's fine to experiment. It's fine to get things wrong and try new things, and I think we're all in that arena right now. But absolutely. A big thank you all. Really appreciated your experience and insights and perspective, and thank you to all of you that have joined us on the webinar today. Goodbye for today, and look forward to seeing you on our next panel webinar. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Russell. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
Thank you.